Well, as the Oklahoma Sooners have now landed 2 commitments, moving them up to the number 37 overall ranked team in the 247 composite team rankings. It seems like the Oklahoma Sooners might start to be getting some return out of the ChampU BBQ. And now the question is, how big is that return going to be? And that's something that we're going to talk about today and talk about potential recruitments that maybe you could see fall here in the next couple weeks. But guys, before we jump into it, before we talk about it, go ahead and hit that like and hit the subscribe button and jump down in the comments below and let me know what y'all's thoughts are. Where do you guys think that this class ultimately ends up for the Oklahoma Sooners at the end of the 2024 recruiting cycle? So, if you all have been on Twitter and you've been paying attention, y'all have seen the crystal balls, and then ultimately you saw the commitments fall in favor of the Oklahoma Sooners for the 4-star linebacker James Nesta, and then the 3-star wide receiver Doge Ezukanama. I hope I said that right. And the Oklahoma Sooners have now jumped, I think it was like 10 spots in the 247 composite team recruiting rankings. But I guess kind of the real question is, we're all sitting here going, what are the next potential recruits to potentially announce their commitments? And I think we have to start with the number one running back in the country, according to the 247 composite rankings and 247 Sports themselves, but has 2 crystal balls currently submitted in favor of USC, one by Mike Roach at a confidence of 7 and one by Jordan Scruggs at a confidence of 6. However, where this maybe was trending to be a USC win after the USC official visit, it now seems that Oklahoma has made up some ground, and you're starting to see the OU staff, Skip Johnson, really pitch to Taylor Tatum about what they were able to do with Kyler Murray and him being able to play baseball and football in Oklahoma. Because as much as what you guys might see on the message boards about USC fans and USC insiders saying that it was Lincoln Riley because the world revolves around football, that's not 100% true. Football was not at Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley flexible in the schedules and the practices for Kyler Murray. So you had to see a guy like Skip Johnson and that staff be extremely flexible in how they were going to prepare Kyler Murray for games coming up in the weeks and get him in practices with those teammates. Baseball was flexible. And so if you're Skip Johnson, you're Brent Venables, and you're this staff, you definitely have something to point to and go, see, we've done this before, and we're confident we can do it again with you, and we're confident we can make it work. And although USC can tout, you can come play for a high-powered offense under Lincoln Riley and still play for a decent USC baseball team where, well, you just saw another 2-sport athlete, a 5-star tight end for that matter, Deuce Robinson, in the last class commit to USC for that exact reason. I think Taylor Tatum is going to end up in the class for the Oklahoma Sooners. But then that question kind of leaves, who's going to be the next running back? Because if you follow Twitter, you've kind of seen with all the predictions falling Taylor Tatum's way, Caden Durham has been throwing the upside down face emoji. Now, I don't want to read into that too much, but it sounds like he doesn't want to potentially be in a class with Taylor Tatum. I'm not sure. Have not spoken to Caden Durham. So it's just kind of from the outside looking in what it looks like. But I might be completely wrong on that take. But Taylor Tatum, the 5'10 and a half, 205-pound running back, would be extremely important to Oklahoma because where you don't necessarily need him this year or even maybe next year to play a super impactful role in your offense, maybe Taylor Tatum's junior and senior year, depending on what it looks like in his path for the MLB, that's when he can start being a force for this team because Javonte Barnes, Gavin Sawchuk, and those guys might be on to bigger and better things at that point. So Taylor Tatum, I think, leans Oklahoma, and I definitely think we probably see a commitment. I would say probably this weekend is what it really feels like is what we might see. So go ahead and jump down in the comments below and let me know what y'all think about the whole situation with Taylor Tatum, baseball development, and how Oklahoma is going to navigate that. And, you know, if you think Oklahoma is going to be able to win the recruitment of Taylor Tatum. But Oklahoma had a couple official visitors this week. And, I mean, one of them is expected, I think, to be on campus at this point. The other one, I think, is a big time official visit that we kind of need to pay attention to. So the first one was Casey Poe. And by no shock to anybody that Casey Poe took an official visit to the Oklahoma Sooners. Currently ranked the number 144th ranked player in the 247 composite rankings. Right now, it looks like you're facing Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson in this battle, maybe even a Texas Tech. I mean, with Casey Poe, I think outside of Oklahoma, it's kind of hard to get a feel for exactly who he likes and where he's leaning. I like Oklahoma still in this recruitment, though. However, I will say Clemson, Georgia, and Texas Tech are all making hard pushes. I believe he's out at LSU currently right now, but I believe with Casey Poe, depending on if Oklahoma gets any commitments in the offensive line room, you could see him try to shut down this recruitment early, try to get his spot secured if he actually wants to be a Sooner. So the 6'4.5", 290-pound offensive lineman out of Lindell, Texas, a guy that, has been playing shot put and discus. So if you follow him on Twitter, you've seen a little bit of highlights of what he's been doing there. A guy that has taken an official visit to Georgia, Clemson, Tech, Auburn, Alabama. Yeah, Alabama is even in this recruitment. So this is going to be an interesting recruitment to see exactly where Oklahoma falls with Casey Poe. It's one, though, that I still probably favor the Sooners and think Oklahoma is probably going to come out on top in victory for this one. But the Oklahoma Sooners got a massive official visit from the 4-star defensive lineman, the currently 419th ranked player in the 247 composite rankings, Jaden Jackson out of IMG Academy. At 6'2", 300 pounds, this guy is exactly what you're looking for in terms of an interior defensive lineman just because of his pure weight size. But he was on campus this past week with Todd Bates and David Stone. David Stone was on campus with his buddy, Jaden Jackson. So if you notice, they do have familiar schools on their top schools list. I think Jaden Jackson had like a top 11. So that's important to keep an eye out on. But if you're the Oklahoma Sooners, listen, you're having to face off against some pretty other elite schools. You're having to face off the likes of Florida, Miami, Ohio State, Texas. Yeah, it's a tough one. He's got over 32 offers, but he has previously taken his visits to Florida. He's taken his visits to Ohio State. He's taken his visits to Miami. And it seems like Oklahoma and Texas are going to be getting the last of the last official visits for Jaden Jackson. And if you are able to go out there, and I've talked about this many times, if your defensive line class looks something along the lines of a David Stone, a Nigel Smith, let's say you get Jaden Jackson and Alex January, or even a DeAndre Cook. That's a very good defensive line class, an interior defensive line class. Not to mention, Oklahoma is positioning themselves well for a couple edge guys like Zena Yumi-Owazulu or Jay-Sean Ross, who we're planning on having here on the podcast here pretty soon. So, I guess I'm leaving out Danny Okoye as well. So regardless how you look at it, Oklahoma is positioning themselves well for guys on the interior defensive line and at the edge. And I think, where a lot of fans expected Oklahoma to have a really big year on the defensive line, I think you're going to see those returns on the defensive line here in the next couple of months. It might not be with any 5 stars, but I think you'll potentially start to see some 4-star commitments drop down the pipeline. The interesting thing is the Lumen brothers, guys that Parker Thune and Brandon Drum talked about quite often, actually moved from the edge position to the defensive line, but ended up committing to Rutgers. So the question is, if Oklahoma feels like they need to go out there and take a couple more guys at that position, maybe they could go grab both Lumen brothers out of Miami, Florida, where it seems like Venables and this staff have a good relationship with him. But looking at some of the other defensive line prospects that maybe you guys might be missing on. DeAndre Cook, the 6'4", 260-pound defensive lineman out of Friendship Collegiate Academy in Washington, D.C. This is one that you guys might not be paying attention to. Now, this right now looks like it could be a Penn State, North Carolina, Oklahoma battle, but DeAndre Cook has a little over 23 offers. And you might say, well, yeah, but he's a 3-star kid, kind of lower down on the totem pole. Well, I want you to understand who's offered the kid, because Alabama's been in there. USC's been in there. You have Michigan State. You have North Carolina, you have Penn State, right? So you have other Power 5 teams, teams that sometimes are at the top of their conference going after DeAndre Cook. So that's why it's maybe a little bit more important to pay attention to that prospect. And then, of course, we talked about what it looks like with the Jaden Jackson. But I want you guys to understand there are other diamonds in the rough that I think the Sooners could potentially go after. And one of those is going to be Tyler Moore out of Locust Grove, Georgia, currently only at 5'10", 290 pounds. So, yeah, potentially a little undersized in terms of the height for a defensive lineman, but the weight is there. And now when you look at his offer sheet, it's not like super impressive. However, I will say this. This could be a situation where it's going to be like a Marcus Strong or an Ashton Sanders, where you're not going to see a lot of teams outside of, well, right now it's just Pitt and Oklahoma in terms of Power 5 Division I teams going after this kid. But potentially this kid, depending on what kind of his growth spurt and everything looks like, you could see him potentially climb up the rankings. Now, the question is anybody else going to try to jump in to this recruitment for Tyler Moore? Because, well, as the recruiting cycle continues to weigh and other people's targets get taken off the board, they're going to look for guys like that, guys that are diamonds in the rough that are not being looked at by other schools. So keep an eye on Tyler Moore. It's one that I think Oklahoma could potentially throw a PWO out to, and one that I think everybody should be paying attention to. You heard me talk about Alex January, the 3-star defensive lineman, currently ranked the 461st player in the 247 composite rankings. At 6'4", 325 pounds, he's extremely massive. Now, if you're Oklahoma, you're having to go up against the likes of Texas and Bo Davis, LSU and Jimmy Lindsey, or Florida State and Odell Haggins and Randy Shannon, right? That's what you're recruiting up against. Not to mention, of his 25 offers, he's also got offers from the likes of Texas Tech. He's got offers from Miami, Arkansas, Georgia, Auburn, Oregon, TCU, Tennessee, USC. So Alex January, a guy that is from Duncanville, Texas, and a guy where you assume, hey, Colin Simmons ends up at LSU, Alex January might end up at LSU with him, but his dad, Mike January, was a former University of Texas linebacker in the mid-'80s. So I would expect right now the Alex January recruitment is probably leaning a little bit more into the Texas, just because this is a Texas legacy guy. I think that's the safest bet. But if Oklahoma wanted to get into this recruitment, I think it's one that they definitely and certainly could potentially try to go out there and win. But outside of that, you really just primarily have your 5-star targets that you really want to be able to go out there and land. And that's going to be Williams Nwaneri, a guy that is going to be in Atlanta, Georgia this week for his brother's birthday, potentially taking a visit to Athens and visiting Kirby Smart. So we're going to have to keep our eyes on that situation and kind of see exactly what Williams Nwaneri decides to do. And then, of course, you got David Stone. David Stone is the key piece to this class that I think a lot of Oklahoma fans want to land. And if you land David Stone, a lot of OU fans will look at this class and go, this was a good class for us. I think we're out on Edric Houston. I think Edric Houston probably at this point, this is either a Clemson or Ohio State win. And then you've got Dominic McKinley, the 5-star defensive lineman that was actually on campus for the Oklahoma Sooners during the ChampU BBQ weekend. And it sounds like Oklahoma made strides in that recruitment, really hitting along the emphasis of the soul mission and really trying to help win his parents over. Now, something we've talked about many times. He's from Lafayette, Louisiana. So you're going to have to battle LSU in some capacity. But right now, there is not an official visit currently set to LSU. That's currently being decided between the likes of Alabama and LSU for that official visit. So we will have to pay attention and see exactly where does the recruitment of Dominic McKinley trend. But we will talk about that at a later date, because Dominic McKinley is not even looking at making a decision until probably after the Under Armour All-American game in January. So keep your eyes peeled on that one, but don't give your hopes up. I don't think that one's going to close anytime soon. Additionally, you have the 4-star defensive lineman, Joseph Jonah Ajonye, and I got a chance to catch up with him. And one of the things that he said specifically in our messages back and forth was, well, Let me pull it up. He talked about how the visit was great and it was really fun. And at this point, I'm kind of having a hard time getting a read on exactly where Joseph Jonah Ajonye is leaving, because it seems like anytime he leaves Oklahoma, he loves Oklahoma. Oklahoma's the leader. I don't get the sense that that's this time. I still kind of am getting the feeling that Georgia might be the front runner here for the 4-star defensive lineman out of Conroe, Texas. And you guys know my position on this. If you're Georgia and you potentially lose a 5-star linebacker in Dominic Riddick to the University of Alabama, then you want to position yourself with just Joseph Jonah Ajonye, a defensive lineman that could potentially be a 5-star defensive lineman. We're seriously talking about that at the moment. And also have a chance with his teammate, 5-star linebacker Justin Williams. So Joseph Jonah Ajonye, we will have to see if Todd Bates is ultimately going to pull out the win and ultimately be able to pull out the relationship over Georgia and land a guy that a lot of people at this point don't expect you to land, but at one point did expect you to land. And then finally, we've got Nigel Smith, the 6'5", 260-pound defensive lineman out of Melissa, Texas. This is an Ohio State battle, clear as cut day. Obviously, Texas A&M, Penn State, Texas are also in that recruitment, but I'm going to chalk this up between Ohio State and Oklahoma. The godfather of recruiting and Larry Johnson at Ohio State, and then you've got Todd Bates and what he has been able to do in putting guys into the league at OU. So right now, I'd favor Oklahoma a little bit more in this recruitment than Ohio State, but at any time, anything in this recruitment can change. So we will just have to keep our eyes peeled on that. Okay, so next up, we need to talk about exactly where the Oklahoma Sooners are potentially sitting at for the 4-star quarterback Samaj Jones, and quite frankly, why Oklahoma needs that quarterback. Because I've seen a lot of you guys say, well, why do we need 2 quarterbacks in this class? Why do we need 2 quarterbacks in 2025? Well, here's the reason why. Because when Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma to go to USC, well, you were kind of in a position where you didn't have a lot of scholarship quarterbacks. So getting a guy like Samaj Jones, who might be one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the country, currently the number 20th ranked quarterback in the country, yes, it would be a good take for Oklahoma. Definitely, probably not a starter, a guy that can come in and start for you within 2 or 3 years, but a guy that could probably play a key role as a backup. Now, I still think if you're Oklahoma, you probably see Samaj Jones end up at West Virginia. I just think at West Virginia, he can start there. I think with the air raid offense, it fits what he wants to do a little bit better than maybe Penn State or Cincinnati. But the Samaj Jones recruitment is still alive and well for the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, we talked about Casey Poe on the offensive line, but exactly where is Oklahoma trending on the offensive line for some of these recruitments? Because you might have just saw the 4-star inside offensive lineman, Jason Zandamela, at 6'3", 285 pounds out of Clearwater, Florida, commit to the USC Trojans. Yes, Jason Zandamela. So right now, I think we're looking at a couple different targets on the offensive line. Liam Andrews, Eddie Pierre-Louis, Daniel Cruz, Casey Poe, and I think that's what you're looking at on the interior. And ideally, what you probably get out of there, you probably get yourselves a Casey Poe, and you probably get yourselves a guy like Eddie Pierre-Louis. And if you land just those 2 guys, then I think if you're Oklahoma, you probably feel good at where you're sitting on the offensive line. But there's also another guy that ultimately took a visit to the University of Oklahoma, and that was Eugene Brooks. At 6'3", 320 pounds, this guy's absolutely massive, going to be able to push defensive linemen backwards and going to be able to create holes for the running backs. Definitely, potentially could be a diamond in the rough or build beat and bow to find and ultimately end up developing into another top tier offensive lineman that you see get drafted into the NFL. But on the offensive tackle space, you have guys like Caden Massey, Max Anderson. You already have Isaiah Autry committed to the University of Oklahoma. But then you've also got guys like Weston Davis and Bennett Warren, who I think a lot of people would like to see those 2 guys potentially commit. But you've also got Grant Bricks. So it's like, okay, where does Oklahoma go? Well, you're potentially going to lose 4 offensive linemen. Well, no, there's no potential. You are losing 4 offensive linemen just due to pure graduation, because they're not really old enough at this point to, or they're too old to continue playing at the University of Oklahoma. Then you've got Grant bricks coming in to potentially replace some of the guys that they have going on there now, and you feel good about it. You feel good about it. Bennett Warren, I still track into the Michigan side of things. I know some people have said Texas A&M. It's going to either come down between Michigan or Tennessee. I don't really see that recruitment right now trending in Oklahoma's favor, but it's recruiting. Anything can happen. So you probably, in this class on the offensive tackle, you're probably seeing a guy like Grant Bricks, maybe a Max Anderson, but probably definitely a Caden Massey. Hey, Marquise Easley put Oklahoma in his top 3. So can't even count out the 4-star offensive tackle out of Illinois, where you're pretty much fighting Alabama and Georgia as well. Oklahoma's in some elite company there. But guys, I want to hear from you. Go ahead and jump down in the comments below and let me know what y'all's thoughts are. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, go ahead and leave me 5 stars. Leave me a review. Tell me what you like or don't like about the show. Guys, if you're watching here on YouTube, I want to hear what y'all's thoughts are about the 2024 class for the University of Oklahoma.